All right, this week we're doing the second industrial revolution, the sequel to the original, everyone's favorite revolution, top five at least. Will the sequel live up to the first one? We'll find out. And the reason we're focusing on the second industrial revolution, originally I had planned to do the first industrial revolution, but since it's mostly a English phenomenon and just limited time left in the quarter, I thought I would just focus on the second industrial revolution, which is really more centered in the U.S. So just to review, that first industrial revolution is when England moves from the artisanal shop, which is kind of how production was organized prior to industrial revolution. Each town and city would have these like craftspeople who had their shop. You had local tailor, local blacksmith, cobbler, who had a shop. With the Industrial Revolution, we moved to the non-mechanized factory. We moved to more complex forms of production. The second Industrial Revolution takes this factory to the next level, takes it more to what we think of a factory in the modern era. Actually, modern factories are totally different than what you might think of in your head. They're basically all automated. But anyways, the second Industrial Revolution, amps this up. So let's just review the first industrial revolution. When it said small shops to small factories, we mean really small factories, like less than 10 workers, centered in the textile industry. So it's centered in the north of England textile industry. This is a clothing production. That's what textiles are. And it's really using water wheels as the primary power source. Later on, there is some steam, but initially it's all water. And get little larger buildings for that production, and the gains really come from division of labor, economies of scale. Like you focus on this, you focus on this, and there are some machines, like there are some water powered machines, but they are very very primitive. Okay. Yeah, so new technology, and you have for the first time some kind of primitive machines, but there's also organizational change. So there's also, we are changing the way work is done. A lot of that is just the specialization of labor, and the payment being, you're going to get a fixed wage rather than a piece rate. The production is going to take place in a central location. Before this, most production is home production. Most building things, constructing things happens, in your house. There's not like a workplace you would go to. So this is the first time you kind of have a place you go to work where your work is specialized and you're paid a fixed amount of money, like a daily wage. And there is some specialization, and there's like supervision provided by the owner. Okay, and so this transformation happens first in England, and really there's lots of innovation that's occurring. So there's innovation in terms of how the labor is organized, but there's also innovation in terms of those machines. So this is what I mentioned. This is the first time we see sustained innovation. It's the first time they keep changing the machines, coming up with better ways to do things, machines that complement other machines. And this is really the first time we see sustained innovation in one industry. The causes of the Industrial Revolution are of much debate, because really this kicks off the modern economy. This kicks off the growing pie modern economy. And so everyone's very interested. Okay, why did it happen? Why did it happen when it happened? Why did it happen, in the 1700s? Why did it take that long? Or maybe it should have taken longer to occur. Why does it happen in England? What's so special about the north of England that engenders this transformation? I just want to briefly push back on the explanations that you may have heard in high school, or like the popular explanations. If you look up like Crash Course in US history or Crash Course in world history, the popular explanations they originally come from economic historian Bob Allen. And it's that England had cheap energy, in the form of coal and high wages. Therefore, there was a incentive to innovate on capital. There's an incentive to essentially replace expensive workers, high wages, with machines that use cheap power, in this case, coal. I want to push back on that because it's kind of built on a couple different fallacies, in my opinion. Okay, in my reading, you can find plenty of people who support the Bob Allen thesis. But in my opinion, it's built on kind of two big fallacies. Not just my opinion, the opinions of other people who I've read. The two big fallacies. So you got the high wages. New work by Judy Stevenson has shown the wages are not as high. In fact, they're comparable kind of to the rest of the world. They're not as high as Bob Allen had thought. So new research has uncovered what looks like lower wages in England than we had previously thought. So the high wage piece falls apart. Also, the high wage piece, we have other periods of high wages. Post Black Death, wages are very high in Europe. So why didn't it happen then? The energy. It's true that England has an abundance of coal. I mean, England's basically sitting on a giant, or it was, sitting on a giant coal mountain. But notice all the initial innovation is centered on an industry that doesn't use coal. They're using water. So they use coal later on. They don't even use coal in the beginning when all this innovations get going. So I think that explanation for the Industrial Revolution is not correct. Okay, so, but these sorts of technologies, these new machines, these new innovations that that are invented in England come over to the US through a variety of means. I mean, these places are very close culturally and very connected. And so it's easy for knowledge to flow from England to New England. It's much easier actually for it to go from England to New England because of the similar culture or similar language than it is actually to go from England to France, and also the similar institutions. And so there are American observers who are seeing what the English are doing and kind of, taking it back home. And so it's adapted, in the U.S. in the Northeast. Okay, and we can see, sort of the U.S. manufacturing sector sort of getting going. This data is spotty, but sort of getting going here in the 1800s. And this is really a New England phenomenon. So you can see that it's really, most of the U.S. is in agriculture, agrarian economy. Not so in New England. So New England really is that engine of industrialization, of adopting those first industrial revolution technologies. That's really where the industrialization is happening within the U.S. The rest of the economy, the rest of the U.S. is primarily still an agricultural economy. So in the South, you have the plantations, obviously, and some small-scale farming. Out West, it's all small-scale farming. This industrialization is really centered in New England, and then, of course, supported by like trading centers like New York and Philadelphia. Sorry, this is a formal lecture. I shouldn't call it Philly. Okay. All right. And so really, like I said, there's primitive machine technology, and this is really centered in just cotton and wool, although you do have non-mechanized factories. So you do have kind of workplaces that would have a specialization of labor in the fixed wage, but not necessarily have the machines. And we have productivity growth in both these sectors. So that just like labor organization, labor reorganization and specialization does lead to productivity gains, even when you're not using machines. Okay, now the large firms are all really concentrated in the Northeast. So this is the average firm size. And so you can see in the Northeast is really where we're starting to get economies of scale, larger firms, and of course, this is where we get the industrialization. So here we have the age-old question, what causes innovation? And so we've already seen there is associations between patents and markets. And so you need that market to facilitate innovation. And so you need that market connectivity that we already talked about with the canals. And also, the types of innovations really in the US, the US is innovating on both things that save labor and save capital, because in the US, both those things have high relative prices. So what's so special about New England? Well, it does have good water. It does have, I mean, it does have lots of nice rivers where you can run your water wheels, but it maintains its dominance after, you know, steam is used. Steam is powering factories later on, not the water wheels. And also you have non-mechanized factories. You have factories that are not even using the water wheels are there. Now you could say, well, maybe it's just that there's not much agriculture, that agriculture is kind of rough there. That's not true either. So the agriculture is actually pretty robust and the returns are high. So we, you know, like anything, is probably a multi-causal story why New England gets the Industrial Revolution or imports the Industrial Revolution from England. It does have large markets, so it does have access to those larger markets. There is, so there's large markets via the coast, and there's large markets inland due to roads and canals. There's lots of urban areas, so these are all good places to market goods, easy to market goods, ship them. You get some urban density, and as I mentioned, it's very culturally and institutionally close to England. So it's very easy to have that entrepreneurial spirit or that innovation spirit, and the institutions that support that. Those are similar in both England and the U.S. And also, what's very, very special about the U.S. So also, we are high human capital too. So you know, Boston or Massachusetts in particular is kind of the leader in public education. So if you look at the history of public education in the U.S., this really gets going in the Northeast. But last thing I want to say, what is unique about the U.S. is there is less resistance to innovation. Typically, workers don't like innovation. Or they are skeptical of innovation, because usually what innovation means is I'm going to replace labor with a machine. I'm going to replace labor with capital. And therefore, laborers will lose their job. So workers, especially in England too, don't like innovation. So you have, in England, you have, you know, your first kind of revolts against technology with the Luddites. You could read about the Luddites if you want. It's a term we now use to people who don't like new technology, but it was like an original group who literally fought machines. It's like the 18th century version of Terminator. They're going after, they're literally attacking machines, the primitive machines, because the machines were taking their jobs. You know, you think of today, it's like you see Amazon developing, the supermarket where you just need to walk in, grab the food and go, no cashiers. Obviously, that's destroying cashiers' jobs. Cashiers are not going to be a fan of that technology. You think about, like the drones that can deliver packages. That's taking, delivery people's jobs, or driverless cars. There's all sorts of people whose jobs we take it. So workers typically would, oppose these technologies or try to slow these technologies. You see professors too. Professors really, really hate the massive online courses. They really, really hate them. And they say, because, you can't deliver the same level of education. It's not the same as an in-person class. It can't be replicated. And some of that's true, but a lot of being skeptical of those classes is, hey, that's taken my job. So, you have all this, but in the US, this is, there's less resistance. So the US has a culture of more accepting of technology and celebrating technology than other places, which typically are more skeptical of that technology, sometimes for valid reasons and sometimes just for self-interested reasons. Like you don't want, nobody wants to lose their job to a robot, Well, actually, maybe me, I'd be fine. Don't trust me. I'll be okay. My son's 4, he'll be old enough to work. I could live off whatever job he gets pretty soon enough here. 12 more years till he can work. Okay. I just need to make 12 more years. All right. Moving to the second industrial revolution. So that was an overview of the first industrial revolution, how it played out in England, and then how it was transported to the Northeast. We'll move to the second one in a second after a break.